Thank you very much, everyone, for attending the session today. It's a pleasure for us to bring you Andrew Bluck from Spark New Zealand. Andrew will definitely introduce himself, and then after this, I'm also going to stop my video, and concentrate on Andrew. So what I'm going to do this afternoon is that Andrew's going to share about his experiences in VoLTE, and we're definitely going to hear from Andrew a little bit around his experiences. And whilst we get started, Andrew, why don't you go ahead and without any further delay, if you can please introduce yourself, and then we'll get the ball rolling, and I'll start asking you some key questions around VoLTE, and then feel free to take your time to answer it. And for the audience, a couple of just housekeeping stuff before we begin. Number one, we have actually made sure that all videos are being shut off, because otherwise it becomes very distracting. Number two is that if you've got any questions for today, please post it. We've kept everybody on mute. If you've got any question, feel free to type it in, and then we'll post the question as it comes up. And then thirdly, enjoy the conversation today with Andrew, and definitely feel free to ask questions. Okay, Andrew, before we begin, why don't you start to introduce yourself and kind of give us a little bit about your background, and take it from there, and then I'll start asking the question. Thank you, Andrew.
Sure, no worries. So yes, Andrew Bluck from Spark New Zealand. I've been at Spark for about 16 years now in a variety of roles, and I've now found myself looking after roaming. So I look after everything to do with roaming, carrier negotiations, carrier partners, wholesale billing, the platforms, the IPX providers, everything sits under me. So we're a team, very small team of three. I've got a billing manager and an operations manager that helps me out. We sort of seem to keep everything running along ourselves. So.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for participating in the session today. And for those who know me, most of you know me, and for those who don't, I'm Ananda from TOMIA, and I'm actually responsible for the Asia Pacific region. And it's a really great pleasure, Andrew, having you on board today. So, Andrew, let me just ask, begin by asking you, right? What was your main driver to expand VoLTE globally? What are the key considerations that you had considered when you guys embarked on this journey?
Quite simply put, our key driver was to ensure continuity of voice services for our roamers. So more and more carriers are turning off their 3G and even 2G networks to allow spectrum to be freed up for 5G. So without VoLTE roaming, our customers couldn't make a call. And that's a bit of a risk when you've got a customer in a country unable to make a call, and particularly in countries like the US, where they all have pretty much or about to very soon turn off 3G and 2G. Although we've got multiple carrier partners in many countries, losing one can result in poor coverage or even no coverage in some areas. So yeah, that's our main driver at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Andrew, on that note, right, when you were talking about 2G and 3G networks shutting down, and and the risk that you put your roamers being unable to do a voice call, but surely, Andrew, as we understand it, there are backup plans, right? Like what made you guys make sure that that you actually went ahead and implemented, VoLTE in the timing that you needed to implement it in?
Well, I did want to do it earlier, and I wish COVID sort of tended to slow us down because the focus was reduced off VoLTE. If I had it my way, I would have started in 2020. But we felt that it was best to do it right and do it properly the first time. There are alternatives out there, and I've been offered alternatives, but I've turned them down in every scenario. And VoLTE is, effectively, it gives the roamer the same experience they have at home when roaming. And that can only be a good thing. Um, Staying away from 2G and 3G networks is good as well. It takes a while for a device to return to 4G after it's been dropped to 2G, and you can get poor performance, and even the 2G networks have pretty low coverage these days. We found that in the US, we got a lot of complaints from one of the other carriers, or one of the carriers there. Just the 2G coverage was not sufficient. Something we found very, very early on.
Very interesting, Andrew. So tell us a little bit about the timing that you've implemented VoLTE. Why was it so critical to do it now? I mean, or even as you were saying, even before COVID, you were already going to do it in, way back in 2020, and beyond. So why do it so quickly? Why do it so early? I mean, a lot of operators we're seeing is kind of delaying their plans a little bit. Uh, why is that, Andrew? I mean, if you got a sound bite of knowledge, can you share with us why so critical to implement,
Well,
apart from some of the things you've said?
yeah, it was happening anyway. At the end of the day, we've got no control over carriers turning off 3G or 2G. So that's done for us. And so we need to move as soon as that starts happening, because we see the impact very, very early on. It also allows us to seize the opportunity that VoLTE gives us. Yes, there is lower cost. Voice is often a high contributor to our roaming costs, and moving to a VoLTE model allows us to lower those costs. Yes, conversely, there is also a reduction in revenue, but the approach I've taken is that's going to happen anyway, and the sooner we implement VoLTE, the better, because it's around revenue retention. And as long as we've got VoLTE up and running, we can bring in new revenue from 4G only carriers that we've never been able to partner with before, but also secure the traffic from those inbound partners, because we do have VoLTE. And I've found that's way more important. And you've also got the reduced operational costs around running different voice usage or different voice technologies within the roaming world as well. So, no matter how hard I looked at it, it was wins. Yes, okay, there's the inbound revenue situation, but retaining the revenue, and as a whole, I viewed and the business viewed as a more important thing.
All right, and Andrew, that is very, very interesting what you've said. So Andrew, if I can understand what you're basically alluding to, was the fact that whilst you knew that that had an impact in cost, I mean, definitely you're talking about cost. We'll come back to that in a second, but you traded off cost against revenue retention, and that was basically what you were trying to achieve at the end of the day by doing that, correct? And with that, you achieve a new sense of balance, and that's where as you say, it was going to happen anyway. So, am I right to say that you guys are starting to really understand how the dynamics will work, so that as you move into the future, you know exactly how to balance that cost versus even the fact with that revenue retention that you talked about.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, the thing that really helped was COVID, because it reset the playing field. We all lost a lot of inbound revenue and a lot of outbound revenue as a result, and there was the opportunity that you could wait until it rebuilt itself up, or we do it now and we reset the playing field, because it's a new real world. Our world has changed within the roaming environment. It's going to take time for revenues to come back, and so it allows us to build refreshed, and build on an IP world, and start to move away from the old circuit switched experience.
Right, right. Andrew, that's again very, very interesting. So, for our audiences here today, you've heard a little bit about how that balance would trigger. So hopefully some of you are thinking around the same consequences as well. So, Andrew, can we deep dive a little bit into the two topics where I think a
Sure.
lot of our participants would be very interested in? Number one, you talk about costs at the end of the day. So, where are these cost saving coming from, Andrew? I mean, from your perspective, when you go into the new VoLTE world, where is this cost saving coming from?
Well, because in the VoLTE world, all calls are handled by the home provider. There's very little involvement or requirement for the visited provider to manage the calls, and so that's where those cost savings occur. You've got less termination rates, less interconnect rates, and everything's moved back on shore, and that's where the costs are coming along. And if we look at the voice rates worldwide, they can often be quite high, particularly for some destinations.
Right.
And moving down to a data environment or a data charge is allows us to improve the offerings to our roamers as well, because our cost base changes. So rather than if you look at our packs that we offer, they have a selection of voice and a selection of text and a selection of data. The wholesale cost of those packs is quite overweighed by the cost of voice. By that voice charge coming down and some of it being replaced by data, not all of it, it allows us to expand our packs potentially out to new destinations. It allows us to add more data, and potentially even allows us to lower the retail charge for our roamers, which in turn is just going to drive more usage as well. So that's the approach that I've taken.
Well, Andrew, that's very illuminating, I have to say. That what I guess again, just to summarize what you've highlighted, is the fact that whilst being able to manage your costs better, you have been able to extend that capability even wide, even cast wider net with your that capability, so that you attract actually more usage overall as well. That is definitely very interesting, Andrew. So,
It's about stickiness at the end of the day, and
right.
the more you can encourage your roamer not to use a local SIM or not to use Wi-Fi services, to take their phone that they have at home roaming with them, the more likely you're going to have a happy customer and a customer that's going to be with you for a very, very long time.
Interesting, very interesting, Andrew. Tell us a little bit on the revenue side. I think you've already touched on it a little bit by expanding the fact that, using VoLTE, you are now actually being able to expand your services. So talk to us a little bit more about on the revenue side. Like, initially, I guess there would be, the retention of the existing revenue, but also, Andrew, thoughts around extending that revenue further, both now and into the future.
Exactly. I've there are a lot of 4G only carriers out there, and uh, we've got inbound relationships with them at the moment, but it's inbound only. And a lot of these carriers have very, very good networks and very, very good coverage. And we've been, uh, I guess, held back a little bit because we haven't been able to put our traffic on those carriers because they don't have a 3G network or a 2G network to allow customers to make calls. Having VoLTE now allows us to go and pick some of those top tier carriers that, and I'll be honest, Verizon is a carrier that I've always wanted to put my traffic on, and they're a very good customer of ours with the inbound. Now I can, and that's only going to improve. When you look at the coverage difference between Verizon and the other carriers in the States, Verizon are way better, and they've got the coverage, and that can only be better for our customers, and that in turn drives revenue as well. And there's other carriers in Asia that are 4G only, in Europe, that I'm targeting to be able to provide traffic to.
Wow, Andrew, that's far extend my thought process as well. I hadn't realized about that. So now, Andrew, we come to a very important point that you've just raised, right, in all of your dialogue up until this point. it's about customer experience. So not only, you have the better ability of managing your costs, you have the ability of extending your revenue, and coming up with more, different models. But the whole thing is around customer experience. So tell us a little bit about that, Andrew. I mean, initially before the launch of this, were you guys getting customer complaints, or how will you see the whole customer experience changing with the advent of VoLTE?
Because the call's handled by us, we can choose the routes it takes.
Mm.
Something I find with circuit switch fallback is you tend to find voice carriers out there that choose the lowest cost routes to reduce their cost base, and that makes sense. And often you'll see things like calls dropping or CLIs falling back, or calls not even initiating themselves. And over the short period, sorry, my cat, over the short period of time, we've seen an increase in call successes as a result. And that's because we're able to handle that call through our systems, and we've got way more control, which is only a positive thing to the customer. The last thing we all need, and it happens to me occasionally, is a phone call from our CEO going, I've got a high value customer that can't make phone calls and isn't getting any coverage. And the more that we can manage that experience, the better. Because I really don't like getting those phone calls on my Saturdays.
I'm sure, Andrew. Thanks for sharing with that. So Andrew, on the same theme of customer experience, how critical it is for you to monitor, your subscribers' travels at the end of the day, and the thought process that you guys have put behind how you do that.
Really critical. I'd rather know about something and be able to resolve it, or at least move the traffic around before I start getting calls from the customers or calls from account managers and things like that. So, monitoring is absolutely important. We use automated monitoring tools that use services in a selection of countries every day and send back a report, and we keep a close eye on that. But even things like welcome SMSs that we've got a regulatory requirement to deliver, steering, making sure our customers land on the right network for their device, for the arrangements or deals we've got in place with those carriers. It's all positive things for the customer.
Right. So effectively, Andrew, is not just outbound, but also inbound as well, collectively, whether it's an existing customer base of yours, or people actually roaming in within your country at the end of the
Of
day.
course. Yep.
Okay,
Of course.
perfect. On that note, Andrew, a bit of a spin here. Devices, okay. How do you cope with devices? Because there's a lot of whilst I guess devices are becoming smarter and smarter, there are more and more people adopting smartphones. Um, uh, how do you see the whole device world changing, and device VoLTE ready devices, Andrew? So I don't know whether this is something that you guys consider. You're putting your hands
Mhm.
around it. What consequences do you see around that whole devices area?
The device side has been challenging at times. We launched with iPhones only, simply because the ecosystem, let's be honest, is probably better managed and less fragmented in terms of implementation with Androids, and it allowed us to have more control and manage what is a significant amount of our base, and get them up and running in a short period of time, while we worked with the Android OEMs in parallel to get the builds ready for them. Um, One thing we have found is that some carriers are asking for devices for local builds, and it seems that it's usually the Androids, because of the differing implementations of Android and the config in the devices. Hopefully, as VoLTE becomes more standardized and carriers and OEMs follow those standards, there'll be less of a requirement to share devices or provide devices. to the point that even I've got a carrier that are doing all the testing themselves remotely using a remote test tool, and they handle the entire lot. So there's no need to send them a device, and that requirement is slowly dropping, which is also a good, because it's not cheap to buy devices and send them around the world and not get them back. Even though you're getting devices from the carrier, you really can't use them. You know, they're there for a reason.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a challenge. We found it a lot easier with iPhones and Apple. Yeah, but
Okay.
giving the OEMs as much notice as possible, so you can even get it in a build, and you've got the config of the build correct. You know, things like IPv6 and IPv4 we stumbled across with one of our implementations, and it required us to send the build back and get it fixed. So there's little things like that we've picked up that we didn't realize, which if we'd known up front, we would have saved time.
Wow, wow. That's a very important lesson, Andrew. I hope that the audience that's listening in get a share of my mindset on that, because I think you've given that you've got quite an experience now launching this. It's thank you again, Andrew, for sharing that with us at the end of the day. So Andrew, as we come towards the end of this monologue, as I call it, between you and I, and we'll start to take some questions. So I'm going back to the audience out there. Please feel free, if you've got any question, please post them, and I'll ask Andrew the questions that you post, and hopefully we'll get through some of those. But before we get to the questions period, um, there is one thing that, Andrew, let's summarize a little bit here towards the end. Uh, Given everything that you've explained, how is this aligned with your company's overall business objectives? How did you align VoLTE with the overall business objectives of your organization? Because, I assume you have to, get the right investment structure in place. You've got to make the right business cases. How did that all come together for you, Andrew? And how did you go about in that process, at least at the generic level?
The continuity of service component was probably key, given the
Mhm.
fact that there was a hard date in time where AT&T and T-Mobile were going to turn off their 3G networks, and putting it bluntly to the business, no one would be able to make a phone call in the US, and that really brought it home to the business of the importance to why to do VoLTE. And the US, although as a bit of an outlier, it's kind of a foreshadow to what we could see with other countries around the world. Yeah, the US is a very hard country to cover, and they've got lots of carriers there, and the impact is really pronounced. But over
Mhm.
time, we potentially could see the same thing happen in Australia. Once Telstra and Optus announce, because those two single carriers, if you lose one of those, Australia is pretty much impossible to cover as a carrier. And you'll see that start to happen with other countries as well. So that was our key business objective, was to keep things going. And we'd taken quite a hit with COVID, and this was another cost aspect, but looking forward and the cost savings associated with that, and the lower operational costs and the better experience, which it was a no-brainer really at the end of the day.
Okay, wow, Andrew, thanks again, sir, for a very, very deep insight. I hope the audience out there, get a chance to really kind of filter some of these thoughts at the end of the day in terms of, the things that Andrew is highlighting as they move down, how they invested in VoLTE, and the sort of impact that they're seeing both now and into the future, and why that investment is being made. Okay. On that note, Bernard, let me check with Bernard, my co-host, and see, Bernard, do you have any questions aligned? Otherwise, I can keep going with a couple more questions with Andrew, but I'll pause here for the audience, because I'd like to see if the audience have got any questions. And Bernard, feel free to post some of those questions with Andrew.
Okay, we've got a specific question so far. So the question is from one of the participants, Andrew, and the question is, do you have plan to launch 5G roaming, NSA or SA, either one, after launching VoLTE roaming?
Totally. So I guess, as I've sort of mentioned, launching VoLTE was around continuity of service. So we had a real issue there that we needed to resolve. In the background, I'm really aware of numerous carrier partners wanting to launch 5G. I've had to push back to allow us to get VoLTE out and deal with the immediate threat, I suppose you could say. Also, our 5G network is, I wouldn't say small, but it's still in its build phase. And I think in another 6 months' time, it's going to have a way better coverage and a way better experience for the inbound roamers. So I'm targeting sort of towards the end of the year to be able to, I guess, let my foot off the issue of VoLTE and cover those off and then start to launch 5G. 5G is an easy launch, really, at the end of the day.
I see. We have a second question coming from another participant. So the question is, what are the major challenges when you're trying to push VoLTE with your partners? What are the major challenges besides the one that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, obviously slotting into people's schedules. The beast, we found the beast that is AT&T. They take a month to do something that I can do in 5 minutes. Simply turning off IPsec was something that took them a month and a half to do, whereas I can instant message one of my engineers and get them to do it now. So it's little things like that we've found, and it's been at times frustrating, but you've got to realize that we're a relatively small carrier and quite nimble and are empowered to do things ourselves, whereas a lot of carriers have other processes around that. Generally speaking, I think there's some challenges in the industry around what to charge for VoLTE. Most of the carrier partners that I've talked about are happy to charge the equivalent data rate or slightly more. I've had some who are looking to recoup or retain their revenue by calculating a data equivalent charge for what they would normally charge for voice. And I'll be honest, they'll be the carriers that I'll probably initially try to steer away from and look to partner with the carriers that can see where we're moving, because at the end of the day, our voice usage is declining. It's been declining year on year, consistently, with almost a hockey stick growth of data, and data is where it's going to be. So, yeah, I can see that's going to be one of our big challenges, but it's very few and far between. Yeah, which has been really positive, I think, for the industry as a whole.
I see. That's the third question coming in, and an interesting one, I suppose, is that how do you plan out or prioritize which destination to go for in terms of which to do VoLTE first, or which network you do VoLTE agreement first? How do you plan that out, and how do you prioritize it?
Sure. So it was almost to some degree done for us. So it was a no-brainer that the first one had to be the US. Yes. And AT&T were the first ones who were turning off 3G. So they were first on the list, followed closely by T-Mobile. What I've then done is I've got Neil and my team to ingest the GSMA spreadsheet of network turnoffs into a database, which then allows us to report on carriers that are scheduled to turn off 2G and 3G in the next year. And that's then allowed me for my hit list, I guess you could say. I've then gone through and removed the ones that obviously we don't have a current relationship with. And that's left me with probably a half a dozen initial ones that I've recognized that get a lot of our traffic, are a key carrier partner. They provide a lot of traffic to us. They're the ones I start with. It's as simple as that.
Okay.
And of course, Verizon.
Of course, I think as you said, right, gives you extra coverage as well as potential revenue from them, coming in inbound as well, for sure.
Exactly.
More questions is that, it's about our region as well. I mean, the APAC region. So, how do you see the pace in terms of Europe, the Americas? They're launching VoLTE on pace, I would say. How about, from your perspective, APAC? Do you see it happening? For, what do you feel in terms of the pace versus the rest of the world in terms of VoLTE roaming launching in APAC?
I think there'll be an area of Asia Pacific that will really drag their heels, and that's probably the Pacific Islands, where there's very high termination rates and they make significant amounts out of voice. They're the ones that I think will be dragging, kicking and screaming to some degree. I think, generally speaking, the Asian carriers seem to be probably prioritizing 5G a little more than VoLTE. And whether or not that's because of the different mix of voice usage, I can only compare the inbound voice usage that those roamers use on our network compared to ours. And voice does seem to be quite a lower thing, but data's higher. Yeah, so different, like I say, different strokes for different folks. It's different approaches for different areas have really have shaped it. My launch list has one Asian carrier partner in there, or two, that we're progressing through. The rest are European, but I'm careful to only select one carrier in a country at a time, so I don't overload my team, and we're focusing on these countries and these carriers, and then we can start to expand out.
Okay. That's it's quite common. It's quite a shy group right here. Anybody has any extra questions? Please do feel free. As we post on the screen, clicking on the Q&A, and then just send a question to all the co-hosts, and then we'll further help you to post the questions. But it's pretty good so far, actually. We've got four or five questions coming out from all the participants.
No, very good. Thanks, both Andrew and Bernard. Whilst we're waiting for some question, maybe I'll just take a few minutes, Andrew, just to kind of summarize some of the really key points that I think you made right throughout this conversation. One is that definitely the sunset of 2G, 3G has kind of compelled you guys to do things a bit more quickly. But regardless, anyway, you guys were going to launch VoLTE even way back in 2020 as the world starts to think about it. Yes, there is maybe a slight adjustment to the initial revenue, but definitely you're protecting long-term revenue and potentially even growing long-term revenue with more, I would say, innovative models at the end of the day. But at the same time, you have a much better way of managing your costs as well. So that's effectively a very strategic for you guys. And as you said, as you step through your thought process around how you wanted to manage that, effectively, you guys thought through, all the pros and cons, how to manage the current cost versus the long-term revenue, and put that into balance. And that's kind of how you come about with this journey. And of course, there are challenges along the way, like negotiating new contracts, negotiating and new capabilities and so on. But nevertheless, you guys are on the journey now, right, Andrew? Would that be a good summary of today's conversation?
Yeah, exactly. I think if one thing I've learnt with roaming is that however long you think the project's going to take, double it. Um, roaming
Right.
projects always take longer than you expect. Something always happens, and you've got to then go and work with the local carrier to resolve something, and something that you didn't expect. And that's part of the challenge of being one of the first in through the door, I guess.
Mhm.
But as as things like this call help, it helps. You learn so much from other people's mistakes, I guess, or other
Yeah.
people's learnings, and that's been really beneficial for us, because we've learned and been able to pass on those bits of information.
Right. And then also, customer experience, and never undermine customer experience, because that's where, you get your customers coming back to you again and again and again. And I think this is also, quite up there in terms of your overall strategy, I guess, in terms of moving towards VoLTE.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yep.
Bernard, I believe you got one extra question to ask.
Yeah, I think there's another question coming from one of the participants. So Andrew, what do you think the impact would be in the long run if telcos in the region will not move to VoLTE roaming, or will not adapt to VoLTE roaming as quickly as we want to?
It's going to come down to customer impact. We're going to have our roamers that are going to a country and not being able to make a voice call, or having a very poor experience. And let's be honest, one of the local carriers will move first, and they'll get the first mover advantage, and all the traffic will go to them, because we've got no real choice, and they'll end up benefiting. I know it sounds a bit brutal, but that's what'll happen. I've got to look after my customers. They need to make a voice call. If they can't make a voice call in a country, then I've got to move my traffic to someone that can. It's going to come down to that, and I would expect the same thing to happen to us as well. If we weren't able to provide a voice service, I'd expect my carrier partners to move the traffic off me. It's a logical thing to do, until I was able to.
I see. Okay. Another question, I think a lot of us would actually as a vendor, we also want to know. We had a guesstimation before as well. So coming back to one of the things you mentioned before, right? Running a VoLTE call as compared to running for a circuit switch call, besides the quality of experience, what about in terms of cost per minute? In terms of the wholesale cost for a circuit switch voice call versus a VoLTE call, what roughly the savings? It can be percentage, or it can be a dollar sign. What exactly is the saving?
I think the rough figure that I've used is 1 meg a minute, and that can go up and down. So if you look at your voice rate, that let's make a number up, 10 cents US a minute, for a standard voice rate, and then all of a sudden your data rate is 1 cent a minute, or 1 cent a meg rather. That brings your cost basis down significantly, and that's really how clean it is. It is surprising, on how those costs will fall away. And we've had the conversation about the revenue as well, but you've got to look at the retention side of things.
Okay. Thank you.
Very good, Andrew. I think, Andrew, for the audience, if there's no further questions, Andrew, once again, thank you very much for this fireside chat. It was really around, getting you to share with your audience, an industry view on cost, on revenue, on new models, on customer experience, on retention of revenue, on business case. You covered on devices, you covered a whole range of topics today. It's really, really quite enjoyable, really. And also, you know, I'm amazed every time we have a conversation around this topic. There's so much more that you kind of get to learn, and especially even for me today, some of the new models that you're talking about, I didn't even kind of came into my consideration. You know, which partners do you do work with came into my consideration. So they're more than meets the eye, I think, when people talk about VoLTE. So Andrew, once again, thank you very, very much for sharing with us. For the
No problem.
audience, please, if you guys have any questions that come to you later on, and that you know you would like me to then pose a question back to Andrew, feel free to do so, because Andrew, you're definitely part of the leader in this entire region as far as as far as we understand it. They've actually gone quite far now with VoLTE, thinking about the whole thing end to end, and that's an encouragement of how to improve, you know, quality of voice overall at the end of the day. So thank you very much, Andrew. And for the
No problem.
audiences, I do hope that you get a lot out from Andrew today. And thank you very much. I hope that will help you guys in your determination of how you run your VoLTE business at the end of the day. So everyone, and Andrew, thank you for the chat. We appreciate it.
Have a good day, everyone.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank
Bye.
you.